Now I've started recording. We are talking about evaluation methods and techniques. We'll be talking about things like terms that you might have heard before in like if you have any sort of science background or you took science in high school, you might be familiar with some of these terms. They're just basic data science terms like qualitative versus quantitative, summative evaluation, rigor versus rapidness, and then we'll also cover some data collection techniques. So we do have a lot of vocabulary in this presentation. It is really helpful, I think, as a UX designer to know some of this vocabulary and be able to speak using this vocabulary and understand the importance of these terms when it comes to evaluating your designs. It's going to help you when you're listening to conversations with your team members, with your developers, with your other designers. It's going to help you speak in a more informed and knowledgeable way. So those are some reasons that I think vocabulary in this area of UX design is particularly important. And it just also helps to kind of create this framework around understanding the why you might pick one technique for evaluating your prototype over another. So first I want to talk about the UX design lifecycle. I cover this every single presentation because we are cycling through, as we go through my webinars, I'm cycling through the UX design lifecycle. So first we started off with the understand needs category. We talked about how you can understand user work and needs at the beginning of your projects. And that involves a lot of research up front. Maybe you're going to visit on site and just watch something going on that you're going to design something for. It's all about the data collection phase, the research phase of the design. Then you're going to take your research and you're going to start to design actual solutions. So you're going to do things like start sketching. You're going to start sketching on paper and get all your ideas out of your head based on the research you've collected. You're going to do things like jump into the computer. Maybe you use something like Sketch or XD, or there's a lot of different softwares out there these days, but you're going to use something like that to start generating some computer-based designs that start to look really, really high fidelity or really similar to an actual mobile app or website. It's going to start to look really, really high quality, high definition. So once you've gotten through that, you're going to start prototyping your candidates. If you've done a UX design before, you might be familiar with something like InVision. InVision is a great tool for this that I like using. There's others, but typically prototyping your candidates involves using some sort of software tool like that to start to create links and hotspots. So for example, you're going to have your nice high fidelity mockup. You're going to be able to press a button and it's going to take you to another screen, that sort of thing. And that's going to help you actually test and evaluate your design. So now for this presentation, we're covering the evaluate UX section. We're going to talk about how you can verify and refine your designs, how you can take your prototypes and start to figure out what's good and bad about your design, what you might want to change, that sort of thing. So let's cover some terms. There are a couple of slides like this. It's a lot of vocabulary. Like I said, I think that vocabulary in this particular part of UX design does start to get pretty important. So quantitative versus qualitative. This is probably the most basic of terms that we'll cover. You might have heard of it before, but quantitative just means numeric data, usually from measurements used to assess a level of achievement, versus qualitative, which is non-numeric descriptive data used to find and fix UX problems. So something like number of downloads that your app is getting, or the number of clicks it takes someone to get from point A to point B might be quantitative data because it all has to do with numbers, versus qualitative might be something like what emotions is someone feeling when they're using their application? Does it make them feel safe and secure when they're using a banking application, for example, that you've created? That might be an example of a qualitative design when it comes to UX design. So I also want to cover objective data versus subjective data. So objective data is data that is observed directly. Objective data arises from observations. So that's kind of how you can remember it, objective observations, and by either the UX evaluator or the participant. Subjective data originates from the opinions of either a UX evaluator or the participant, and it concerns the user experience and satisfaction with the design. So that's like subjective, like it's all someone might like it and someone might not like it. That's like more subjective. Objective is not so much about feelings, it's more about observation. Another term, you've got formative evaluation versus summative evaluation. Formative means it is a formative evaluation is a diagnostic UX evaluation using qualitative data collection within the objective to form a design that is for finding and fixing UX problems and thereby refining the design. Summative evaluation is a UX evaluation with the objective to sum up or assess the success of a UX design. So a good way to think about this, and actually a metaphor that came up a lot when I was researching this, was the idea of formative evaluation is kind of like a chef tasting his own soup and saying whether or not it needs more salt or if it's good or bad, versus summative evaluation is more like when the guest tastes the soup. So when like the actual patron of the restaurant gets the soup in front of them and they're tasting the soup. So that's the difference between formative and summative. So I wanted to briefly cover, I know this is a lot of text on this page, but I promise it makes sense. We'll only go through a couple of them and then it will make sense to you guys and we can move on. But I did want to briefly cover the difference between formal summative UX evaluation and informal summative UX evaluation. So we're looking at formal versus informal here. So typically formal is more science-based, informal is more engineering-based. Formal is more randomly chosen subjects and participants, whereas informal is deliberately non-random participant selection to get the most formative information possible. So why would you use an informal technique over a formal technique? Because obviously the formal technique is going to be more complete, right? You're using rigorous and powerful statistical techniques, whereas informal, you're using deliberately simple, low-power statistical techniques. And the reason for this is that it is often cheaper, it's faster to do, it's just so much easier and simpler to do these informal processes. And you can still get some good data out of it that can influence and help you create a good design. Formal usually takes a lot more time, a lot more effort, a lot more energy, money, participants. So it's a lot harder to do. And so not every team, not every situation is going to have the power to do a ton of formal summative UX evaluation. So in an ideal world, you're going to want to use both. So this is kind of a little diagram that illustrates the perfect concoction of evaluation techniques in your evaluation process. So you want to use some formative evaluation techniques and some informal summative evaluation techniques to come up with your kind of user experience evaluation as a whole. A couple more terms for you if you're not sick of vocabulary yet. Empirical versus analytic. Empirical means that depending on the data observed in the performance of real user participants and data coming directly from user participants. Analytic is based on examining inherent attributes of the design rather than seeing the design in use. So that's the difference between empirical versus analytic. And now we get into the more fun stuff. This is actual techniques that you're going to use. We're past all the vocabulary. Well, there might be like 2 more vocabulary terms, but we're mostly past it. So early design reviews and design walkthroughs is a really great technique to use. Basically, it just means that you're demoing the design as the UX team to get early reactions and feedback from team members and other stakeholders, including users. So it's a really informal way to start to get some feedback from your stakeholders, your users. It's basically just you showing your design to people and saying, hey, what do you think of this? So this can happen at many, many different stages of the UX design process. You can show someone your sketches, you can show someone your low fidelity mockups, your high fidelity mockups, you can show them actual prototypes. But the whole idea is that you're driving this presentation, you're the one clicking through your design, and you're explaining maybe a little bit, you're demoing a little bit, just explaining maybe your thought process even a little bit, but then you also want to get some feedback. So kind of balancing that, having that balance between, okay, I want to show someone designs, I might have to explain them a little bit, they might not be super complete yet to where I can have them drive and have them click through like an envisioned prototype, but I can start to get some feedback if I, ask some questions and explain a little bit what my idea is for the solution for this. So that's the design walkthrough idea. Another technique is the expert UX inspection technique. This is a really cheap way to get some good feedback on your design. It's an analytical evaluation method in which a UX expert evaluates an interaction design by looking at it or trying it out. Ideally, you're not going to be the only one doing this to your own design. Ideally, you want other designers on your team or maybe in your network to also look at your prototype and provide expert feedback. The great thing about giving a design to a UX expert is that they have a lot of experience understanding the pitfalls that users commonly face. They know a lot about user experience and what makes something easy or hard to use based on their knowledge and their experience in the field. So that's a great reason to use UX experts to help you evaluate your data. One way that you might do this is by doing the heuristic evaluation. So heuristic evaluation is something that was developed in like 1994 by Jakob Nielsen, and it's a series of heuristic indicators that allow you to inspect your design guided by a set of heuristics. So you might look at something and say, you know, you're going to go down this list of items on, you know, what generally makes something a good or bad design, and you're going to start to say, okay, this design has some really hard usability problems. It has some easy usability problems. It was a successful design. It was an unsuccessful design. And you can start to create a little chart like I have here, where you're taking all these different pinpoints that you come up with, these questions on like your design that you might have, and you can start to pinpoint where on this chart they fall. So if a usability problem is really easy to solve and it's something that a lot of people are really having a hard time with, you know that that's an area that you want to solve right away because it's easy to fix and a lot of people are having problems with it. Whereas a usability problem that is hard to solve and that most people aren't having issues with is going to be lower priority, right? So you can start to get feedback in this way by using this heuristic evaluation method, by either observing users or having stakeholders or UX experts or whoever mess with your prototype. You can start to collect this data on whether or not your project is user friendly and kind of create this little chart to identify those areas that might be problems for your design. And so where can you find those guidelines? You can find them on the Nielsen Norman Group website. But yeah, I thought about adding those 10 into this presentation, but it just would have been a really long presentation. But if you guys want me to dive deeper into the actual definitions of these heuristics, that might be really fun to include next time or something. But I also want to cover subject matter experts. This is another definition. So a subject matter expert is someone with a deep understanding of a specific work domain and the range of work practices within that domain. So for example, if you're designing for a healthcare system, a doctor is going to be an expert in the field of being a doctor. A UX designer is going to be an expert in the field of UX design. So a subject matter expert, your SMEs, are going to be such helpful people to get feedback from because they know the field that you're designing for, and they might even be some of your power users. They might be people that are going to use the thing that you're creating a lot. So yeah, that's a great thing about subject matter experts. But you also want to balance that. You don't always want to just rely on subject matter experts. You definitely want to also ask people that maybe will be users of your application but aren't necessarily experts in the field. So you want to make sure you're getting a range. But I wanted to cover rapidness versus rigor. So rapidness typically results in rapidness, meaning this is just like when you're trying to decide on the techniques to use to evaluate your prototype, you're going to have to sometimes sacrifice rigor for rapidness or rapidness for rigor. And it's all about trying to figure out that balance between how rapidly you want to evaluate something and how much rigor you want to put into it. And that's going to depend on a variety of factors. So how much money do you have in your budget? more high rigor evaluation is going to be more expensive versus a more rapid methods are going to be on the cheaper side. Rigor is going to result in more complete results, and it's going to have higher accuracy. But yeah, it's just all about balancing how much time do you have, how much money do you have. So how high can you go in the rigor category without sacrificing all of your budget and taking way too much time on this portion of UX design. So it's really it's just trying to create that balance. I wanted to cover a couple of UX evaluation data collection techniques. So one great one is user questionnaires. So user questionnaires are really simple to use. They're good for evaluating specific targeted aspects of the user experience, including perceived usability, usefulness, and emotional impact. So asking someone if they are satisfied or unsatisfied with your product, with a certain feature that you've created for your product, that sort of thing. The issues with user questionnaire is when you get into the realm of actually creating your own questions for user questionnaires, it can get tricky because unless you are putting your questions through very, very rigorous statistical analysis to ensure that you're not creating leading questions, it can be hard to know for sure if your questionnaires answers and results are valid. So I thought I had, yeah. So here's an example of a leading question. I just pulled this from copywritingcourse.com, but for example, a leading question would be something like, on December 23rd, is it true you shot Timmy McBakename in the face in the North Sacramento Whole Foods parking lot at 6:34 p.m.? So this is more of a leading question than something like a normal question, which would be, where were you on December 23rd? You want to shoot, if you are creating your own questionnaires, you're creating your own questions in general when you're asking about your designs. Avoiding leading questions is really important because you don't want to influence that person's answer. You don't want to give an indication that you want a specific answer. You want genuine feedback from people. You don't want to actually like lead them straight into the answer that you want. So also I want to talk about critical incident identification. This is a really great technique to use as well. Critical incident identification is a qualitative UX data collection technique that involves the UX team observing user participants, performing tasks, and detecting critical incidents or occurrences where the users encounter UX problems. So it's essentially a usability interview where you're having the user, typically it has to do with like an already developed application, although you can do this with a prototype as well. And you're asking questions like, when has this application helped you be effective at your job, for example? When has this application been a big barrier to you when trying to do your job? Answers to those kind of questions are going to have the users recall times that are kind of extreme. So when they've had extreme problems or extreme positive experience with the application, that's the kind of data you're going to get from doing this kind of critical incident identification type of usability test. So yeah, that's what that is. You basically just ask them things like, you know, when was the time that this application was a big impediment to your work, that sort of thing. So the think aloud technique. The think aloud technique can be used in conjunction with a lot of the techniques we talked about already, but it's great for usability testing because it's a data collection technique in which participants verbally express thoughts about the interaction experience. So the easiest way to do this, the most straightforward way to do this, is to essentially just have the prototype available to the user and have them actually think out loud as they are going through the process. So say you've got a checkout process on your website and you're trying to test it. You might have the user go through the process. You might say, okay, you know, go through the process of buying an item from the website, and you'll watch them actually click through the website. And you'll ask them to think out loud as they're doing so. So they're going to say things like, okay, first I'm going to click on the shop button. I'm going to find the item I want. I want to sort by price because I want to buy a cheaper item from the store. Then I'm going to look for something that is in the color red because that's my favorite color. then I'm going to press add to cart, although I don't see an add to cart button, so I'm trying to look around for it and I'm not finding it. That might be kind of the train of thought someone goes through as they're going through this hypothetical website. So that's the think aloud technique. It does take a user, you might have to explain to the user a little bit about how to think out loud and encourage them to speak a lot, even if it seems a little silly. You want them to be talking a lot as they're going through the process so that you can get as much feedback and data from that experience as possible. Another great technique is A/B testing. So you might do this with an entire application. You might have version A of your application, you might have version B of your application, and you might test both prototypes and see which ones users like better, which one users feel more comfortable using. So that's the great thing about A/B testing, is you can test two things at the same time and compare them to each other and get some good feedback that way. You can also do this with really small pieces of information. So it doesn't have to be a whole application. It can be something as simple as, do you like this homepage design versus this homepage design? And can you tell me why? Or I'm going to show 10 users of this webpage design and 10 users this webpage design. And you're going to tell me some feedback about it. And I'm going to compare the data I get from the people that tested homepage A versus homepage B, that sort of thing. So that's the end of my presentation. I did want to briefly cover, if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them down below and I will cover them. But I wanted to mention that a lot of these techniques can be done online, which is really great. I tried to focus this presentation on a lot of techniques and methods that can be done online. Things like Google Analytics helps you get some of that kind of passive data collection on things like clicks and that sort of thing. So that's going to help you a lot. Also, you can use tools like Skype to do screen shares and have someone click through your presentation, do like video calls, that sort of thing. So there are ways that you can make this work even in like the COVID-19 world where you're not able to be in a conference room with a user. So request if you can share a copy after the session, will be really grateful. Yes, of course. I do always record all of these sessions. Here, I'm going to stop the recording now.